Welcome to Corporate Caffeine. I'm Dacia Coffee. As a chief marketing officer, speaker, author, copywriter, and three-time entrepreneur, I've learned a thing or two about influence and impact in the business world. So I want to share with you what I've learned about how to be heard, be seen, and be successful, and introduce you to the people I've met along the way who learned how to unlock their potential. On today's episode of Corporate Caffeine, we were joined by Mark Vincent. He is a facilitator with Maestro Level Leaders. He's the host of the Third Turn podcast, and he's the founder of Design Group International, which is basically the base camp for process consulting. But what all of that means is that Mark's current work is about helping leaders to take their success to an entirely different level. It's about succession planning, about building future value, and about fulfilling your legacy, stepping deeply into your potential and making sure that you are going as big and as high as you are possibly capable of going. It is exciting. And the one thing about talking with Mark is even a single conversation will end up being transformational in your understanding of what it takes to get where you want to go. You are going to love this conversation. Let's dive in. Dr. Mark Vincent, thank you so much for joining us today.
I am glad to be here.
Absolutely. It's always so fun to have a conversation with someone that I look up to, that I aspire to follow in some of your footprints, and then also a friend, where it gets to be personal. So there's no telling where this conversation is going to go.
Every time we talk, I learn from you. So I'm always eager for this.
So exciting.
Well,
so how...
The pressure's on.
I know,
the doctor's
right?
asking you.
I know, that's very intimidating.
Not for advice yet, but...
No, don't ask me for advice. So how are you? What are you excited about this year?
I am excited this year about the launch of Maestro Level Leaders, which is this cohort for leaders who are in what we call their third turn. They are moving into figuring out how to have the company that they are responsible for, or the organization they're responsible for, in a place that it can grow and be even better when they're not running it anymore.
Yeah.
So the normal story is that value gets lost, that there are ego battles, there is loss of mission, there's personal drift that happens, I don't want to work so hard anymore, and any number of issues that lend itself to when a transition comes, the preparation work is done too little, too late, and a lot of value is lost. It's actually a very similar dynamic for mergers and acquisitions, where everybody starts to get really excited about getting the paper signed, and whatever plans they had for how they would consolidate the businesses or build out from there and work with talent and get everybody on the same page quickly disappears. And you get this false mission of let's sign the document. And that also happens with transitions. So what we're working to do is to gather people who are on that very unique journey, and what is somewhere in the last 10 to 15 years of their career, maybe a little bit less time than that, but to give 4 good, hard years of working together where they are creating a job description for being founder or emeritus or whatever it will eventually be, developing the map to get through this uncharted territory, because it's a unique context, a unique individual doing this, the model that they will begin to implement with others, their board, the senior executive team that they have, as they move toward what next for the business as well as for themselves. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily leaving at that moment.
Right.
But quite often they're becoming a chair of the board. They're moving up to a seat in a holdings company. They're going to, watch over this new initiative that they're doing. They're going to focus on developing future value while somebody else is running the business. There's any number of transitions that could happen. Now, here I am going on, but I'm excited about it. We got it launched, and we have a lot of good content that underpins that through the Third Turn blog and a related podcast.
I mean, so exciting to be thinking about the energy, the dreams, the value, the processes, all the things that these leaders built for decades, and that they will continue and potentially even gather more momentum even after they depart or move into their new role or whatever. Yeah. And but I can imagine that can be really difficult for individuals to wrestle with. And real quick, you said 4 years. You didn't go a couple of years or we spend some time. Like you went 4 years. Is that a specific, like have you identified this is why, or this is the appropriateness, just how much time it takes to go through certain things? Because that was very specific.
That's a very astute question, and you're right. It is a specific number. It kind of splits the difference between 3 years and 5 years.
Right.
4 comes between those two numbers. But the normal process for change is getting your hands off of it so that something else can come in.
Yeah.
And so that a new embrace can be formed.
Right.
And there's a certain amount of time that it takes to be ready to take your hands off of it, to take your hands off of it, to let something else come in where it's nurtured and cared about, and then that new embrace that involves other people can actually happen. And if something is going faster than, let's say, 3 or 4 years, there's a lot of disaster that's involved.
Interesting.
Right? So let's say you go really fast through a big transformative change. Well, you're not going to have the same people working with you.
No.
That you did. You're not going to be in the same business that you were in. That is augmenting a crisis. It's turning it around. It's saying, I don't want to do that anymore. It's real rapid. And so you don't, you really have a restart in a sense at that point. But if you're working to continue something and you want to bring people along with you and you want to give opportunity for people you care about as well as fold in what's new, it's a deliberate process.
Yeah.
And a big chunk of it is getting ready.
Yes.
You know, if we were farmers, we'd be looking at planting season, right? So then is the tractor in good repair? You know, are the plow blades sharp and not dented and, you know, lined up correctly and all of that? Is the ground ready? Is it dry enough? You're doing all that work before you're actually in there making that happen. So almost all the theorists who work with change management are saying it's 3 to 5 years to affect significant permanent adjustment.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe I'm making a leap here, but maybe I'm not. So in your business, you know, you call it the third turn. And when you're talking about the different turns, first turn is, you know, swiftly speaking, work on yourself.
Work on yourself.
Second is learn how to lead others. So work on others, helping them fulfill their potential.
And the organization.
Right. And so then the third is organizing all of this together and moving into legacy and future work, not what needs to happen right now.
Right.
And so it sounds like in a abbreviated way, it's almost like these transitioning leaders have to go through those 3 turns or allow themselves points of view inside of each one of those as they transition. Is that oversimplifying, or am I really just like trying to...
Well, I think we can even simplify it one more level, just to really boil it down. If someone's going to move through these turns and do it well, they must be a lifelong learner. So what helps them learn to lead self is that they are learning.
Yeah.
They're learning their capacities, they're learning their skills, they're learning how to lead a project. They actually need room to make mistakes, fail, restart, move over to a whole different area of profession so they kind of land in a place where they can have a sense that this is a vocation, this is a field I can grow in and I can do some good. And many people, in fact, most workers will actually stop there.
Yeah.
They will become what I call an artisanal leader. They will be the best at this thing they do. Programming, mechanical work, customer service, just name a field. They are the one you do not want to lose because they are so good at it.
Yes.
Right? Then out of that, someone can be asked, will you now, because you're so talented, will you bring that talent to run the organization? Well, at that point, everything they have learned is out the window.
It's a totally different skill set.
Right.
Yeah.
Being a master in what you do is a lot different than running a business for that mastery.
Right. Right.
You know, they're 2 separate things.
Right. And I often say that the area that they're so expert in, because this is marketing blender, right? So we'll say marketing, the minute they are in a C-suite running things. And if they come out of marketing, they'll have some skill there, but they will not be the most skilled person in about 6 months. They won't be as up to date. They won't be able to read all the journals. They won't be able to go to all the meetings because they got to pay attention to what the research and development side is saying, what sales is saying, what customer service is saying, on and on and on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they cannot come at this as the expert where everything is a nail and they've got the hammer out of their experience. So they have to learn what it means to be an executive, to use executive functioning in their brain, which is much more about problem solving and starting with I don't know rather than I do know.
I can speak to having to go through that transition in my own business. Absolutely.
Right. So then when you move into a third turn, you've learned how to run a business, which is you're managing current value and all that. But as you look to how do I transition this? How do I bring somebody else in to run the business that it is now as opposed to the business that it was when I started? And to the business that we seem to be becoming.
Yeah.
Where what I'm handing off is not something that I actually am running or have run, but what we will be running. Where you're looking into the future, you're looking into the mist, you're trying to figure out what that future value is. So there's an example I really like. But the point is, you got to learn all over again, right?
Yes.
So here's the example. During COVID, senior living communities have discovered that for the future, their business model has to change. The facility itself has to change.
Yeah.
So many of the people who have been running, let's say a company that has 30 or 40 of these facilities across a state or in a region, they don't have the time with their current executive team to figure that out.
Right.
But they have to figure it out.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So what is likely to happen is the person who's got the most seasoning, they're not going to do it all by themselves, but they have to give attention to what that future is.
Yeah.
So that they can retrofit current facilities, but any new facility they might create or assume, let's say they survive whatever the economic flip is, and they're in a position to actually take on facilities that are close to bankruptcy, and we've got seniors that need to be cared for and so forth. They've got to figure something out that hasn't been done in quite the way it's been done before, and they are not likely to be the person running it in 20 years.
Right.
One more example is GM. Right now, we're going to be all electric in a couple of decades.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
The people who are making that happen won't be running GM
Once it happens.
once it's done.
Wow. Yeah.
So long-term vision.
So it's learning. Learning.
I think that's actually probably the state of the world now for most. So
Yeah, to go back to on a smaller level than GM should say, these leaders that you're transitioning, say for 20 years they've had this business and done day-to-day operations and this has been their baby. For that switch to turn and go, okay, I'm going to walk in today and view things totally different. Who holds them accountable? Like who's there on their shoulder tapping on them going, oh, back off. You've got to delegate. You've got to do these things.
Right.
So in your system, you train them, okay, from the beginning, like it's your mindset or go through this program? How's that work?
Well, there are a couple of things. One is there are some really good programmatic things that are out there that touch on aspects of this. So let's say, wow, I got to change. Retirement's coming, or I've achieved something, but now I feel so empty. What am I going to do?
Yes.
Well, a group like Halftime is awesome for that, right? Or I've had an event. I just got bought out, and now we're trying to figure out what to do with the money. I'd never really thought about it before. Well, you got groups like National Christian Foundation and community foundations. A lot of denominations have their own foundations. So does most alma maters that we've got, right? That would help us, walk with us for those things. But for that person at the intersection of the organization, where that's an aspect, like what they're going to do with money, what they're going to do with their life. Or we could also say how to figure out the valuation of the company. All of those aspects come together at this intersection.
Yeah.
So to have what we would call more of an executive advisor kind of relationship and a cohort of companions, people who are in their own context, having their own journey with it, but they're kind of comparing notes.
Yes.
Is a way to bring all of that to one intersection where you can examine it all, because because it's an intersection, there is something that happens with the dynamics flowing together than when you just take one aspect of it all by itself.
Yep.
And so being there at that place where we can turn them at the right moment, which is different for each person,
Right.
to the resource that they need, then that's really what we're after in this cohort.
Well, and those cohorts are so impactful. I mean, obviously I'm part of, or I'm a member of Convene.
Sure.
So I get to participate in, a different version of what you're talking about. But the thing about it is a lot of times I'll be listening to someone tell their story. And then how our brains work, we immediately are placing ourselves in that story.
Yes.
And even though their story and their business and their industry and their exact scenario have nothing to do with me, by the end of it, it has everything to do with me. I mean, I am somehow learning lessons that I didn't have to walk in their shoes. And it's amazing the seeds that get planted in regards to, oh my gosh, I can apply this over here. And it might be weeks later or whatever, but I'm blown away how much more I learn by not using the people around me to solve my problems, but to walk together.
Right.
Because it's incredible, and especially if you're a God-fearing person, it's incredible how the answers come,
right.
Through connection,
right.
and, the desire
right.
to do this together.
And that puts you in a spot where you've come to that gathering of other leaders open to learn.
Yes.
Rather than prove yourself, arms crossed, prove yourself that you have something to tell me about my life, my business, and to be in a spot where you regularly come, arms open, head open, ready to think. It's a nice shortcut to learning and appropriating. But that means the posture of, I don't know, isn't it wonderful?
Yeah.
Is what has to lead for us.
Now, do you see this more in men? I would take it just saying that our egos may step in the way, of having your arms crossed and being the man for, say, owning your own business for the 20 years. And then now they don't ask for help. They haven't spent all these years asking for the help.
Yeah, what I don't want to do is to create one brush that paints everybody in my response. So let me come at it from a different doorway and see if it gets to your question. There is a form of authority that we might call role authority. There's also like an expertise authority. There's like an earned authority. And so people who have a sense of expertise authority, I know stuff, I've been there, I'm the guy, tends to be a little bit more male in my experience. I'm not quoting anybody's survey, but it tends to show up a little bit more. And in more women, in my experience, it tends to tilt a little bit more towards this kind of earned authority or role authority. Let's go with the role piece. I have the title, and I worked really hard to get the title. And I have overcome a lot of stuff, and there was not a natural path that was there for me.
Right.
And I don't know exactly how that plays out for people maybe where they're starting from isn't their gender, but maybe their cultural tradition, their ethnic tradition. But when you have anyone who's saying, I earned this, or I have the title, then you've got that closing up.
Right.
Mm-hmm. As opposed to more in their character of who they are that's actually conferred. So if a person is coming to you and saying, it's irrespective of your title, irrespective of your degree, and they're saying, I think you know something about this, can you help me? That's a sweet spot to be, and it's usually because they feel you're approachable, that you'll think with them, that you're open, that you will problem solve, that you'll engage. And what we're after here is to help people, especially in the last part of their career, come at this from wisdom, not from strength, and force,
right?
But from a calm, from seasoning, from being tempered, and recognizing if they don't give away their authority, it's going to end with them.
Yes.
Yeah. We do work for people who have started their businesses, who've grown them throughout their families, who just infiltrate their whole spirit, body, everything into that. Then we work with software startup technology companies who their whole goal is to sell it.
Yes.
And so they have the open mind and vision of going, okay, I've got to build it to this. I've got to rely on a professional marketer, X, Y, and Z, and plug all these people into place. When you look at some of the other ones, that's why I asked the question. Mainly, male versus female. I was just wanting to know the characteristics.
Yeah.
And we can point them out pretty quick now that you think about it.
Those are very different approaches.
Right, and they are. And so you end up with, if you say, okay, well, where's this leader? Are they in a second turn? If they're selling, their company at age 35 for $40 million,
right.
Well, they're likely to say at that point, do I want to do this again?
Yeah.
Or do I want to do something else? And it starts to be a little bit more second turn kind of stuff. Do I want to repeat what I've done? And I meet people like this all the time. And that's a fine place, again, to say, this is who I am.
Yes.
I'm a serial entrepreneur. I build businesses to X, and then I sell them. Or I come into companies that are failing. I take them from 10 to 20 million. And that's what I do. And then I'll be looking for the next assignment. And I work for the investment firm that puts me in these places to turn it around and make it work. That is turn to stuff, and it's great, and you can have a wonderful career doing that. And a third turn for a person like that tends to be more, how am I going to spend retirement? Right. How am I going to give back out of what I've accumulated and so forth? How am I going to give time to family, time to a ministry, time to a volunteering? And that's a wonderful place to go. Whereas in the third turn, if a person has arrived there, they are looking at, okay, here's this thing that someone else is going to run, and I actually own it, right? I've got to give it away, or I am operating on behalf of a stockholder board or something where we have to transition this.
Yeah.
And to do it in a way that's healthy. So, anywhere in there, you just kind of say, where are you? What's your context? What are you working at? What's next for you? And you don't treat these as hard and fast doorways. You're just saying, are you primarily running an organization, or are you, and looking for the next one, or are you getting ready to have an organization that somebody else will want to run and can succeed?
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting. The process of giving things up in order to gain more and give more is so fascinating to me. I mean, when I think about the turns, I'm in different ones, depending on how you look at it. Yeah. So for instance, we had a business together, a trucking company, and we walked away from it because we did hit a point where we were saying, what's it all about? And we realized it was stealing too much from us to be able to give any more. And so we just disrupted all of that natural progression, especially because Kyle was the founder, that he knew he could have gotten to, but at what cost, right?
Yeah.
So then
that was the main thing, at what cost.
But it was kind of a strange third turn for us, like in a way or weird way, because then we were embracing legacy and realizing for us, we couldn't take the business into a third turn. We had to walk away.
Right.
Yeah. And it was either all in at this moment. It was the downturn 2008 or 2010. Well, I've already established myself in the industry, oil and gas, and it was to the point where I could have got a contract overseas for 6 months on, 6 months off. And that, I had an 8-year-old, 2 6-year-olds at the time.
Yep.
Or right around there, 9, 7. And
they're young.
And I go, all right, I'm going to disappear out of their lives, and I know people do this in the service all the time. But, we just thought it was best for us to dismantle the company.
Yeah, so, he would have been moving, very specifically through turn 2 towards turn 3.
Well,
and we were like, psh.
I said this is the point, though, where my kids can really benefit off of it. I could make enough money in a few years and just keep it going. Maybe they would want to get into it. And I'd give them that option. And we're like, all right, tap the brakes. Let's focus on, you go do what you love now. I've done this for almost 10 years at that point.
Well, and for me, you know, squarely in turn 2, 45 years old, you know, building my business, fractional CMO for other people. So at lots of leadership seats. But the further I go deeper into it, constantly giving up that first part, the mastery piece, like choosing to surround myself more and more with people that are absolutely going to be better than me. They need to be better than me. And I love thinking future. Like I love thinking legacy. And when I walk away from it, but nowhere close to actually doing the things, and it will be so fascinating because I can't even imagine. I mean, there's a wrestling I do even right now in turn 2 with constantly and just trying to shift from here to here around. My focus has got to be on other people's potential, replacing myself, constantly. And it's these little daily choices about me versus other people getting out of the way. And so, looking to the future about the whole next level of, that emotional, spiritual journey around doing that, but then protecting value for others that you will not get to see. Wow. Like talk about ascending through your potential in life and what you can leave. I mean, that is a very exciting mountaintop, but not necessarily an easy one to scale.
You've touched on the person's character, their emotional well-being, their spiritual well-being, and their kind of their focus, so that they're making these in the moment kinds of choices that go in the direction that is future facing instead of just current right now, what takes care of today, right? And we see this when you see this as well, when you're talking with executives, you can see very quickly if they are in the now or if they've got a future kind of cast to them. Yes. They're in the now, they're busy, and everything's kind of intense, and they're in it so much that they're basically just managing something. Yeah. And actually, they kind of reinforce it with their choices because I'm going to do 10 more emails.
Exactly.
Right? As opposed
I'm going to work till 10 at night.
Right. To having the strategic kind of meeting that drives future value. So there is a very practical part of this as well. Yeah. And I don't mean to sound like the spiritual choices, the emotional choices aren't practical. They are real. They are needed. But you can also get very tangible, maybe a better way of saying this. Right. And that's to ask that person who's saying, well, I'm thinking that maybe, I've got to figure this out, or I'm just going to ride this hamster wheel until I'm dead. Right. Yeah. Okay, so what is the future balance sheet? Yes. So you can get very concrete at that point. So to even operate the business as is, the balance sheet that keeps it sustaining, where you've got it capitalized to the right degree and all of that, has to be different than it is now. So if you say 5 years from now, what does the balance sheet look like for us to even be the business that we are now, which is a process of making this pristine again? Yeah. It starts to force categorized kinds of choices and strategic intent. Then if you start to say, well, what business should we be in? Yes. And what balance sheet needs to undergird that, right? Then you are tearing into future value. And that starts to also drive all of the little choices. Huge. Wow. That is amazing. Okay, I'm gonna chase the squirrel a little bit though, because there's so many things in my mind that our audience can't hear because I know about your background and they don't. So, I mean, you have written about stewardship. You've written about loss and hope. You lead leaders. I mean, you are a significant person in regards to moving process consulting forward and leading with that I don't know point of view. So I love listening to this conversation because I can hear so many of these threads really woven together in your third turn, if I will. Yeah. And so talk to us about your first turn and your second turn. And let's go back a little bit and go kind of how'd you get here? Because it's
someone
really
who's got it all figured out. You want to know where they came from. Do you have it all figured out, Mark Vincent? Well, enough.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, I would hope.
Enough to consider. If I was talking to one of my buddies, I was like, this guy's got it figured out.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. When I'm like, I don't know, I'm going to call Mark for sure.
Lately, I have been very reticent to open up something like Facebook or LinkedIn because I find that another mentor of mine has passed away.
Oh, yeah.
And that has become a litany of names. And when I look at what I was given compared to others and the story that they have of arriving in their own leadership kind of body and stuff, mine isn't full of, oh, here's this great big failure or here's this great big triumph or whatever. I was surrounded, and I credit my parents for seeing that this would be beneficial because they started me in it when I was 9 or 10, but surrounding me with mentors.
It's amazing.
People who would talk to me, people who had good character, people who most of them don't have a scandal that happened in their 40s or 50s or whatever, where they brought the whole house down and their family got all, interrupted. These are people who just finished well. And when I was in high school, I had junior high and high school, there was a elderly person whose name was Bill Kloffenstein. He had been the president of Brotherhood Mutual Insurance Company, a lot of property and casualty insurance. And he was now retired. I didn't know him as the big cheese in the community or whatever, but he was in our church. And every so often, he would come up to me. He was short and roly-poly, but he'd come up to me eyeball to eyeball because I'm not very tall. And he would say, Mark, I pray for you every morning at breakfast.
Wow.
God's got his hand on your life. God wants to do something in you. I don't know what it is. I hope you'll listen, but I'm praying for you every morning.
Wow.
Well, that's like drip, drip all throughout my adolescence, right? Well, I'm also then attending the same church with his successor who just died last week, Paul Steiner, in his 90s. And I grew up with his sons and daughter. I saw how he and his wife Ruth lived, how they did things. So I'm just witnessing this. And I could just go on with a number of names of people who sowed good things into me. And so I'm coming into the workforce already believing that the way you work well is like my father and like these other men and women that I was surrounded with who see themselves as giving away what they know, raising up others who will carry on what they have done and advance it in some way. That the whole work is to give yourself to other people, not to take out of the business.
Yes.
And I think that that's normal, and I have learned in my life it is not normal.
It's not normal.
It is not normal.
I think more people need to hear stories like this. We all hear about the story, the big catchphrase like you mentioned earlier about, oh, I came from nothing, now I have everything.
I did it all by myself.
All by my, that's where the arms are crossed.
Yeah.
But the power of influence through someone who just to help guide you in mentorships is just unreal. Like if more people knew to reach out to people at a young age and let them make the mistakes.
Yeah.
You don't always have to live and learn. You live through other people's learning or live through other people's mistakes.
Yeah.
And
make their love and willingness to share that with
right.
you. Yes.
So coming into my first turn, right? I'm started out as a community worker, a full-time staff member in a congregation with a responsibility for neighborhood outreach, so community organizing and so forth. I became, without meaning to, that wasn't my plan,
right,
the senior pastor of this congregation. My thought had been that I'd be in academics, maybe archaeology, something along that line. That was where I started, but I end up working in this neighborhood church while I'm in college myself and then in graduate school, become the senior pastor. And that's another mentoring story. The senior pastor saw something in me in my early 20s, and so did that congregation where all the elders of the church were older than my parents.
Yeah.
And they said, we'd like to see you do this. We see this in you.
Whoa.
And I made all kinds of mistakes and I learned all kinds of things, but they really nurtured me and cared about it. We did some good work together. But in that, I am doing this graduate work where I'm learning about group process. I'm learning about discernment. I'm learning about how you structure where there is complex decision making to be made. And you've got groups of people who have to work together that might not like each other.
Yeah.
So an example sometimes is the college campus who want to build a new dorm.
Yeah.
And the neighborhood association doesn't like it. And you have a zoning board And all three of those somehow have to work something out. How do you do this? Well, I was very fortunate because it was the right place, right time, where Harvard Negotiation Project is putting out the book Getting to Yes, and they're showing these methodologies about group process and group discernment. I'm doing graduate work. I'm writing a thesis on that, and I start getting these phone calls. Would you come help us? We've got this crazy knot going on in our organization that we can't untie. We hear you're working on a methodology. Would you help us? Now,
So cool.
Just because I'm that old, this is when things like teaming and brainstorming and win-win scenarios were all thought to be new age phrases. Like they're like voodoo.
Yes.
You don't say this stuff. You brought out a whiteboard to write on.
Fluff?
No way.
Yeah.
So I began to get a lot of requests and found that these methodologies work, and that led to another, would you come help us? I had no business acumen at that point. I had no thought that this was what I should be doing. But in time, it just kept growing. It's like, there's something here. How do I pay attention to it? And that became, over time, I could go into a longer story, but a second turn where we launched Design Group International. And I ran that company and helped grow it for 20 years. My wife and I founded it, and it became this platform with a process consulting orientation, which is iterative. It means you ask questions. You come as a learner rather than, I know stuff, let me sell you my time. And just one quick sentence about that is I often say that if we're talking about expertise, that's more like contracting. It's more like being a vendor or a project manager.
Yes.
But to really consult with someone, you're interrogating the problem together.
Right.
They don't know, so why should I think I would know? Let's look at it. Let's figure it out together. And that became the work. So after 18 years, we kind of hit a wall organizationally where the role that I carried needed to blow up. It needed to be several roles.
So it was bigger than just you. For everything to expand, it's like,
I was
all right.
becoming a choke point.
Yeah. And so how did you get the guidance then to bust through that barrier?
I'll back up to watching someone like Bill Klopfenstein, who I just saw him do it. And then my father and his generation, there were a lot of people who were very strong at what they did, very expert at what they did. And they ended up folding up their shop at the end.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so their income and their equity both disappear.
Yeah.
And so I'm seeing here's a positive way through it. I think it can be a very deliberate choice to say, I'm just going to run this thing until I'm done. I'm going to close the doors, lock the doors, and somebody can have the building, right? That's fine. But that's not what they wanted.
Yes.
These men and women wanted to sell what they'd built.
Yes.
Right.
And they couldn't let go of it. They couldn't trust someone else to run it. And truthfully, a lot of the people they brought in weren't trustable or reliable. It was like watching Hamilton, the musical, right?
Yeah.
Give me my shot.
Yes.
And the other person can't be George Washington and say, I'm going to go sit under my vine, So everybody's going for their shot and they're battling the founder and the successor. And then the whole thing just deteriorated into nothing. So looking at both those examples throughout my own upbringing and my own career, I felt like I could begin to see, not that I'd ever lived it, but I could see a way through it, much like I want to raise adults. I don't want to just have children. And I could see families where they had children, but they weren't raising adults.
Well, when they're 18, that's it.
Yes.
Right. I've done my job. Now they're adults.
Or
on paper.
Or we got them potty trained, so we're done.
Yay.
They're in school now.
And I will argue with the fact that you hadn't lived it potentially because, you as a young man are becoming a pastor to a congregation that is a complex environment, which, ironically, you end up studying complex decision makings in complex environments. It is. Right. You were part of a succession story. So even though you were the successor, you had seen that and you have people living in their legacy. And so while you were the recipient, not the one passing the baton, so interesting because I would argue you had lived it and that, you had literally been placed in those environments so you had already had the thing in your brain to trigger, oh, I'm here. Because one of the things I lament all the time and I'm trying to come to is that You can't, or I can't learn lessons sooner than I learn them. And I hate that. I look at the things that I've learned, especially in the past 8 years with the marketing blender. And I want so much to have known those in year one.
Yeah.
But you can't.
You can't.
And it doesn't matter if it's about money or relationship or leadership or confidence or, conflict management. Oh, I could just go on and on. But you learn them when you are supposed to learn them and when you're able to learn them, and nothing in your experience roster can trigger an alternative point of view. And so it's interesting because I don't think it's accidental at all that you were like, well, I've seen this before. This is where we're at, and it's time for me to
I'll accept that
do what
critique.
Kyle was saying.
I'm smiling at you as you say it, because I can feel several people behind me who've been a part of my life, especially my first wife, who's now deceased, Patricia now, who's my wife, who'd be saying, Mark, how many interim assignments did you take as an executive where you turned it over to a successor? Well, yeah, I did about 15 of those.
15. Yeah. Most people can point to one, if any.
As a consultative piece. But all that has taught me is that it doesn't get any easier.
Yeah.
And that every one of these is its own story, its own context, and it's individualized to the people who are the key players in it. So I would like to think it's easier, but it isn't. And I can't bring what happened here to the next one.
Isn't that
there's some references, but it's not going to be, repeat, rinse, repeat.
Right.
No, to break through the next level, or to hand off a company selling a gadget or a widget, whatever you want to call it, compared to you owning a consulting business where it's a lot mindset, and to be able to scale that and get it past the 18 million. How do you find the people? Do you find them the best fit your qualities that you can train them or teach them your philosophies? Or do each of them have their own individual strengths that you're like, ooh, they could really help me grow or help us grow?
That's a great question, because you're touching on the fact that this is so individualized. So you just talked about different types of business. Now put different types of personalities, put different types of ownership structures, put different types of what their fiscal reality is in the moment. And then, is family involved or not? Right.
Yes.
And what's the division of ownership? All of those things make it this really unique thing. And I would say one thing I think is in common in any of the stories is that these are strong people. And I don't mean forceful necessarily, some are, but they are strong, and they aren't lacking in confidence. That
they're not going to fail,
right?
Or
they're if they want to enter into this kind of journey, it's because they want to go after something like they've gone after it before. So what we want to do is to channel that in the most productive place, and it is different. So I'll use this example of judo or another martial art, and I'm not a martial artist, so I might not be exactly precise here, but the idea is, from what I understand of judo, is that it is being able to take the momentum off of your balance rather than forcing your way in. So you're not bringing your energy to attack,
right?
And you're also not defending. You're using the attack of whatever's coming at you, its momentum against them, to keep your own balance. So it's as much about your restraint as it is your motion going forward.
Yeah.
So what happens in this moment is that you have to begin to say, where do I restrain myself so that others can come in? How do I be watchful for what's needed so that when I do touch it, it is for its good, not just for my own pride or whatever, because the mission is changing from building the business to handing off a building business to someone else's stewardship,
right?
Who will in turn do the same thing. So that part we hold in common across just about anyone I'm working with, is that they're strong. They've got a momentum that they now somehow have to arrest and adjust if they haven't already. Some have that already. I mean, they've already begun to do that. and then we're just turning it for a new direction and a new vision. But I find that many are not, and their momentum is likely to carry them past the opportune moment.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a great visual for me in my mind about when people are bringing influence and ideas and change and momentum into it instead of meeting that momentum head to head and trying to control it and stop it and make decisions about it. That you go with it and you direct it and you can have, you can be a part of it, but that you have to go along with that. I'm like, whoa,
I just keep visioning two magnets, how you're going, and you're pushing them and you're pushing them and you're pushing them, and finally they go stick together where they finally, join forces.
Or one flings out of your hand.
Or one flings out of your hand. You're like, maybe they weren't meant to sell it. Maybe they weren't meant for this transition. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yes, exactly. So real quick, Design Group International, where'd the name come from?
Well, with process consulting, you are using design thinking.
Right.
You're using design language. You are starting with why. It sounds like I'm using catchphrases, but actually we're just old enough that we didn't invent the phrase, but that's where we were landing, right?
Yes.
And so now you're seeing a larger pickup of this kind of iterative approach to problem solving. So design thinking, that's not a new phrase. Start with why, Simon Sinek kind of has that nailed. Yeah. But that has a history that even precedes them.
Yes.
And we can't take credit for inventing it. One of the deepest sources for this is Ed Schein, who started the whole idea of process consulting and started naming it that way. And his work very much stayed in the academic world, and it's now finding its way even more fully into business literature. People who have MBAs usually have had to read one of his books or talk about a process orientation. And you're seeing process consulting show up more in engineering and in software management. You're seeing it in agile process and so forth. So it's finding its way. So at that point, we're saying, look, this isn't just Mark with a profession and a shingle, and you come see him as an artisan or whatever. We could have taken that approach, but there was enough success as we started what is now Design Group International that we had to make a choice. Is this for others?
Yes.
And ultimately decided that we would create a platform so that people who have a consultative expertise could have a whole vocation, bring others into the business at an appropriate point, be able to sell their business at a certain time when the time is right, and you could make a whole career of it as opposed to this is my in-between jobs adventure, which ruins the consulting field over and over.
Yep.
And so a group who are focused on design. And do we work internationally? Yes, we do. So it's just so simple and descriptive.
Yeah. It's interesting what you're talking about, though. So, that process consulting, it was incredibly impactful for me going through that training with you because it clarified and identified some things that I was starting to come to and starting to embrace, but had not been introduced to the whole body of work, so reading Ed Schein's book or one of them. And, I love that because it almost, number one, gave me the, allowed me the permission to make not only organizational impact, which is obviously what I'm paid to do and marketing, but also individual impact, where how I interact with the leaders, how I interact with the client on a one-to-one actually can be as impactful, if not more so. But I had to allow myself to do that it wasn't only business. And, my heart and head function that way naturally, right? But then to bring it to an engagement on purpose, totally transformative. But my creative director and I, Eric Peterson, we talk a lot about what's the future of the marketing agency because agencies are blowing up. The model is not really working. Everybody's trying to figure this out, whether they know it consciously or not. And so much of where our turn to is going is how do we allow smart people to think through complicated problems, inside of their own mastery, but then give them structure and processes to do that, but applying it to marketing. And, we're in the middle of this, so we're muddling our way through and, but I can't take on all the clients. And so now we have other CMOs and trying to protect the philosophy of how we think and how we serve and how we help companies grow and going, okay, what does it look like when we train this and, try to scale this,
Right.
even though it's not a tangible delivery. I mean,
Right.
and it's been incredibly impactful for me to think through that I don't know first, and the willingness to allow people to learn alongside of you and solve tricky problems. And digital marketing, you can't do anything except iterative. So many leaders want to go, okay, exactly what am I getting for my money?
Yeah, give me a package.
That's right. And you're going to get insights. You're going to get misses. You're going to get leads. You're going to, get visibility. But exactly in what combination, we're just going to have to get better and better at it. So we make projections and then learn. Mm-hmm. And, one of our core values has been tell the truth as early and often as possible when it comes to data. But you have got to bring first that approach of
it's always changing.
Yes, and that, okay, we're going to get some of it right, but we're going to get some of it wrong, and we need to be in this together. You guys have to ask smart questions. We have to ask smart questions,
Right.
And that's how we move forward.
Yeah.
It's very different than having the answers and doing it and just
Right. Well,
cranking it out, but it doesn't work.
I don't know your profession obviously nearly as well as you do, but hearing you talk, I would think that all it takes is Facebook as just one channel.
Sure.
Making one adjustment in their algorithm
this year.
And everything that you've done for the last 3 months is out the window.
And it's funny that you brought that in, because that's exactly what's happening with Facebook right now. I cannot tell you how many people are saying this has been working for us for years and nothing's working now. And it's the same thing. And it's because they changed something in the background, and you're 100% right. But you've got to be willing to go, okay, it's changing, and we're not just stuck here and entrenched here that we're just going to be angry,
Right.
or we're going to stall our willingness to improve and iterate. So, yeah.
And a ton of people are great at collecting the data. It's just, what are you going to do with it next?
Yeah.
When things do change.
Yeah.
Right.
And everything
Which is
has
another
changed.
expression of process and design. And when we're talking a third turn or this maestro level leader kind of cohort, it's another application of the same thing.
Yeah.
Given what we've got here, what will we do? Well, community organizers for years have said, oh, that's appreciative inquiry. What do we have to work with? As opposed to moaning over what we lost or what we don't have, which only wastes calories and neurons. You're not making any choices. You're just moaning.
Yes.
Right? And it's okay to say, oh, stink. It's gone. All right, now what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Because you acknowledge it. But if you're lost in it, you're not going after the new possibilities that are emerging. And what I hope we can keep modeling together for leaders is that actually this is the normal.
Yes.
The normal is you are always figuring it out. If you start to think you've landed and you've done, or you've taken the hill, or whatever your metaphor is, you're already winding down and decreasing the value of the firm that you run.
And I can relate to the willingness to want to fight against that, because there's a point where you go, oh my gosh, that's exhausting. But you have to be willing to say, or is it exciting?
Yeah.
But, especially if you have this idea that someday you're just going to retire and it's just going to be over and you're just going to sail off into the sunset easily and you're just going to walk away. But life has never been like that. So I'm not quite sure why anyone would expect, oh, I'm just going to hit this magic age of 65 and fairy dust. Everything is transformed without work and effort and
I think some people take the bad days worse the longer they go on, because they don't remember when they first start. There are always a lot more bad days, or should be, at least 10 years into it,
to learn.
where you go, oh my gosh, last week was horrible. Well, it seems the more you run your business, the more you get, master at it, those days become far and few between. So when you do have a bad day, it's magnified, and you're like, when's this ever going to end? I always have these bad days, but
Right.
in practicality, no, you haven't.
Right.
You may have had one a month now,
Yeah.
or one every quarter, or whatever that may be.
And now you're talking about the pain and anguish of knowledge transfer. So you've lived through it, and here comes the young pup, the wet behind the ears person, the whatever, that doesn't know that in the way that you know it in your body. They've had their hard knocks over, but they haven't done it in the organization through all of those moments of figuring it out. And you're going to have to let them make a mistake, which reduces profits, which harms things. But it's all with this view of being able to have profits when you're not touching it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love the example in the scriptures of Moses as an example. So, just really quickly, his father-in-law Jethro comes and visits him, says, why is everybody coming to you? You got to divide up the responsibility. And he does. And right after that, you get Korah's rebellion. You get a golden calf. You get all of these spies who go into Canaan land. And we used to have a Sunday school song, 10 are bad and 2 are good, right? But he finds Joshua and Caleb through that process and is able then to walk with them, particularly Joshua, who becomes a successor and is able to do things that Moses is now not going to do, cannot do. And you can literally look at Moses' life, the first 40 years, the middle 40 years, the last 40 years, with the 120 lifespan that he's credited as having, and see, first turn, second turn,
that's awesome.
Third turn.
Yeah.
It's just a great one to look at if you want a case study.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's one of the best in history.
That is
Yeah,
amazing.
True.
Oh, I love it.
I'm having a hard time smiling with my mountain biking accident. Well, anyway.
I know. It's so funny. You're going to actually have to tell that story on a podcast tomorrow. So.
Oh, yeah. You know what? Mark Fratto rides bikes as well.
Yes.
Road bikes. You mentioned you ride road bikes, but he had was it on his road bike he had a bad wreck or a car wreck? I
think it was his road bike.
I think it was his road bike. Anyways, that's another
You're giving
story.
me all
That's for
kinds of
tomorrow.
hope.
That's for tomorrow. Yeah.
I know. Married to the business, he says, well, I can't be on that one. I'm like,
He would have been great
it's-
for the transition. He sold a engineering firm a few years ago.
Yeah.
Did marketing for him.
Well, and he's watching the third turn go poorly, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So.
And there's no guarantee, is
Nope.
there? There's no guarantee. You can only do what you can do.
Yep.
And somewhere along the way, the person who is receiving the handoff has to have a similar spirit or they are going to run it into the ground. I mean, the normal story, shirt sleeve to shirt sleeves, 3 generations.
Yep.
Businesses have shorter lifespans than human life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
What is the most recent projection now for businesses?
I don't know what the length would be. I know what the success rate is for startups, which
Yeah.
is abysmally small.
Right. Exactly.
If somebody gets to 5 years and they're actually profitable,
Yeah.
no matter what it is, they are already a unicorn.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Already.
Yeah. Wow. I heard something somewhere, but I think they were talking about Fortune 1000 companies where their longevity on that list is only 50
You can even
years.
do it like
It's
the
very
Fortune
short.
50. And if you go 20 years, who was in it 20 years ago, who's in it now? Are they still in business? You'll find some. But if you ask, are they in the same business? They're in a different business, or there's a big change to the model.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Apple's a great example where the future is already not likely to be phones, although they're still doing pretty well there. They're having to forecast that. Well, Apple wasn't in phones prior to about, 2000 or 2010?
Yep, exactly.
Or 2009, something like
That's
that.
right. Yeah. And their iPods and all of that, how it migrated and
Right.
changed.
Right. And it
oh
was
my
the
goodness.
personal computer before that, but that's not their big money maker anymore.
Yeah.
Nope.
Got to adapt to change.
Yeah.
Kodak. Perfect example.
Always
They could have
case
been here and
Did you
decided
know-
to stay with the camera. and
Not
film.
only was it about the film and the digital camera, they actually had and developed the technology that would eventually become the phones of today.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even only that they refused the film and the digital transformation. I mean, they literally had the key to the kingdom
Right.
and just said, nope, you're
You
going to
know,
hide that
wow.
under the mattress
Yeah, it was-
over
On the
here.
flip side of that coin, though, I watched a documentary about a year ago on Tabasco Company. And they're, 7 generations in?
Wow.
Privately owned.
You just want to go, what are you doing
Yeah,
right?
the guy
That's
who's interviewing
amazing.
says, so how much are you worth? He goes, that's between me and my CPA, because it's been so long.
Yeah.
That is so cool.
Yeah,
So
there
cool.
are stories, there are examples, and one of the things that we're after is to be able to pull those out what I got to watch as a child is not everybody else's experience. So finding ways to get those stories in front of others.
Yeah.
And even people that, hey, I could probably reach out to that person. I could probably call them. They would respond to me, so that we have a community of people where we would say they care about, they're driven by the hope of grandchildren's grandchildren.
Yes.
We can kind of make our mind go that far into the future. So if I'm thinking about my granddaughter, Bryn, who's my oldest granddaughter, she's 8. If I'm thinking about whatever I do with her grandchildren in mind, gathering a community that says that matters, as opposed to, what's my 401k say right now?
Yes.
Yeah. And look, it's bigger than yours.
Right.
To have that orientation. We want to gather those kind of people in substantive conversations, help them know each other more fully than maybe we've been able to do in the past.
Oh, so beautiful. I think that's such a great, pin to place for a moment, just because so many people are obsessed with bemoaning the state of the world right now and how everything is deteriorating and people are rotten and this and that. But I don't know. I think it depends on what you choose to look at and what you choose to give your attention to and what you decide to participate in, and I don't think it's about rose-colored glasses. I do think it's about when you decide to think about your grandchild's grandchildren. Mm-hmm. I mean, that very much creates a very different type of community, different type of people that you attract, a different type of energy and, approach to love and connection and relationship inside of your family and inside of the broader realm. Mm-hmm. And then that becomes your reality because you chose it. And so the chicken or the egg. But I always do wonder, the people that they love problems as a worry stone. Mm-hmm. Well, right. It's your favorite thing right now. Right. And you've got to be careful where you place your attention and how far you're willing to look in the future. I think that's healthy.
Yeah. Well, imagine if this was the year 1865 and, everybody's coming home from Civil War, if they come home at all, right? And all the devastation and all of that. So, to be able to set that, or say, what was the Spanish flu, 1918?
Right.
At the end of World War I, it doesn't take but a moment, if we breathe, to get perspective. But then we have to choose. Do I want to move into a particular direction? Well, what direction is that? And I have become very affectionate toward a word that I just learned. And it is that I am not just an individual. I am also an embedual. I am embedded in a family. I am embedded in a community.
Oh, that's interesting.
I am embedded in a state and in a nation and on this planet.
Wow.
And my life needs to reflect not just my individual desires, but embedual desires, or I'm denying at least half of what myself is.
It's so interesting. Powerful. I know there's definitely more layers to just being a member of a community. Or a part of a group. I mean, but an embedded. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Really cool. Really cool. Okay. I have another question. I should never say final. I am notorious for being like, okay, one last question. Then I ask 30 more.
Going back to that is, defining success. And so many people do it around monetary, what they're worth, their value. And I always looked at it as long as I did better than the generation that raised me and in their generation, and I provide for my children, like you said, your grandchildren, that forward thinking of they better have better than me, whether it be, worship, monetary, whatever that may be, their lives in general better off than mine. That's my goal for them.
Right.
And hopefully it was for me. I'm like, I just did everything I could to be better than the generation that put me in this place.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so your work crosses all of the boundaries in regards to growth in the business world, which is why I'm so excited, of course, about having you on. But what kind of encouragement or advice or, what would you say to people about growth in today's world and about achieving growth or having more impact in the business world or, just anything like that?
This response is, I hope, the kind of question is in line with the question that you're asking me. What I think about right away is where I try to spend the time that I spend, which is there's this intersection between the person and the organization that they lead, if they're an executive leader.
Right.
And that intersection reflects the capacity of the organization and the capacity of the person, which becomes their capacity to lead the organization's capacity. I mean, it's all kind of crunches together.
Yes.
So it's how big can we grow that intersection? So if we're going to grow the business and that executive leader isn't growing, it will outstrip them. And that will either mean they no longer should be in the seat, or that the organization will collapse back to the size that they themselves can lead.
Wow.
Right?
Yes.
Or let's flip that around. If the person is growing and their capacity is growing and the organization itself is not, it doesn't mean that the organization is broken, because there's reasons to have a lifestyle business and make it a thing where it's running off the profit rather than factoring it for growth. There's all kinds of reasons that it might not be. Right.
Or should be.
But that person then will find that the organization is not the domain of their influence.
Right.
And then somebody else is going to have to run it, because if they start to function in some other kind of domain, this business is going to deteriorate if someone else isn't being able to sit in the chair and lead it and grow it and run it. So the growth constriction happens when one or the other is not growing in the way that the other is.
Nice.
So what I'm often looking for with a person when they're saying, I don't know what to do. Tell me your story. And what we're listening for is, who are they? What are they learning? What are they developing? What's their skill set? What raises their energy and what robs it?
Right.
And we all have that formula. Now, here's the business. What is its demand? What is its marketplace reality? What's happening? What's its history? Where do you want to take it? And then you begin to see what the gaps are. Now we find out if that leader is a lifelong learner or not. Because the minute you start to look at the gaps, I think I'm going to say back exactly what you said a little bit ago, Dacia. They're either going to be saying, here's an opportunity, or I'm resisting it, or I want more data, but you don't understand, or we're different. And as soon as that happens, you know that we've got a leadership capacity issue that's limiting the business.
Yeah.
Right? And it can be the opposite, where the business doesn't have enough capital. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have enough of a marketplace reach. It doesn't have the right product mix or whatever else. And so we've got to make an adjustment there so that this leader's vision can actually be more fully utilized.
Right.
So that, for me, is a major part of growth, is removing the constrictions. And the constrictions are often there together, the organization and the person who is responsible for it.
I love it. Okay, as a follow-up question, give me just a couple of examples of, obviously, these gaps that you identify. They reverse engineer themselves into, as you mentioned earlier, the decisions that people make on a day-to-day basis. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, what are the kinds of decisions that are impacted where the leader, for instance, is learning to build capacity? What does that look like on day one, week one, month one, year one, when you're trying to build leadership capacity? So
I'm just going to guess, but you can confirm this, that some of your clients are nonprofits.
Mm-hmm. Few.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in the nonprofit world, that's just the first example that comes to mind, is that you often will find that leaders, and sometimes even board members, and sometimes whoever's responsible for the money, they think in terms of the expenses.
Yes.
Instead of the income.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you ask them, this is a fun little game to play, and it will break your heart, actually. Ask a CEO what their income is. 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you what their expenses were, as if they are the same thing. You ask them a left side of the ledger question,
really?
They're going to answer from the right.
Interesting.
Because the whole point is to have the money that covers the expenses that they're committed to.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So they're trying to get back to zero every year. We've committed to this money, now we got to raise it. But they're not thinking about what their income pool is, where it comes from. It doesn't mean that they're totally ignorant of it, but if you ask them about their income and they answer from the expenses,
it's their paradigm.
It's the paradigm, and that's often present day one, year one, and it's in the water, it's in the culture, it is from board to frontline volunteer, really very deeply present.
Fascinating.
So that'd be one example. We sometimes see it where the person who's running the business understands the OpEx side, but struggles to understand the CapEx side. They've run the department, they've run the division, whatever, but they don't know how to work with the board. They don't know how to work with the investors, and they resent every moment they have to spend capitalizing the business as opposed to operating the business. Like that's an interruption. But that's where the balance sheet is built from, right? And then one more is often see this with CFOs, some CMOs, but it's more usually in the CFO or a head of HR or whatever, where they are not strategic. They have the title, but they are approaching it as a super administrator. So it's about the paperwork and the paperwork being organized rather than serving the business and its mission and its vision.
Right.
And or you have that CFO, and this is where it gets tragic, it's about everything being reportable with excellence, but now you don't have real-time information flowing. And if I've got a minute, I'll just give one really important example, because right now we're seeing we're going to put an enterprise operating system in here. We're going to make everything digital and run it.
Sure.
Well, the issue is, back in the day, if you're running a tool and die shop and you own the thing, or you're one of the machinists, whatever, you can put your hand on the walls of the building and you know if things are running true or not. You can feel it in your body, you can touch it. As soon as you take your eyes off that, because it's all now digital, you're not feeling the machines, you're serving the software. Now imagine doing that in the C-suite as the chief financial officer, where you're not so much looking at the cash flow, you're just making sure there's a cash flow report. You're not so much saying, did all of the invoices go out today in 15 minutes? You're wondering if the batch file went out, and it's easier to send a batch file if you do it twice a week. Right? And so all of a sudden, 6 months in, you've got a problem where you're dipping into your line of credit to manage payroll that you never had to do before. And more often than not, it has been an unthinking, non-strategic way of putting software in play to automate tasks that helped you monitor the business.
It's like efficiency over effectiveness. And one actually, you lost sight.
Right.
Over the
and so what we often are seeing is that somebody who's moving into the C-suite, so turn 1 to turn 2, they're bringing their expertise to it, not realizing that they can't just apply it to their channel. Right? That cylinder that they rose up in and have some kind of maybe more omniscience about.
Right.
It is now touching everything, and they have to pay attention to the whole. They have to have a visceral connection to the business. They cannot offload their brain to that. And that is one of the things that we're seeing right away when they're coming to this role, is like, I've got to prove myself, just like I did in turn 1. No, you don't. No, you don't. And also, don't do the other ditch of this road, which is, I'm not going to do anything for a year.
We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes and learn. Right?
Do you know, it's sad. that's one of the reasons that the fractionals end up getting hired, is because we have to make very quick, strategic and practical impact. There is no, I'm going to walk the halls and talk to people and get a sense of where the organization is already at. Nope, you need to do that in 1 month or less.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting, because I think that approach, that aggressive approach, maybe more people need to embrace it, and obviously I'm going to be super biased towards be aggressive, progress over perfection.
Do something.
Jump in, do something, make a decision to make a decision.
Right,
like,
and then watch.
Never just sit down. Exactly. But that has a tendency to be my happy place, not the opposite. So, Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. This was so fun.
Always a pleasure.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. All right.
Yeah, very nice to meet you.
And you. Thank you.
All right, Mark, how can people connect with you?
It's pretty simple. The website that I work from is maestrolevelleaders.com. And there's a place there you can just reach out and send a note, and we can get a conversation started. And I respond, so it's not going through somebody else. I'll be happy to hear from you.
Okay, I do have to ask one final question. Are you writing another book?
I am trying to get one started.
Okay.
There are 2 manuscripts, one in particular that I would like to see around the core competencies for process consulting. We have a new course that through the Society for Process Consulting that is really hitting a home run. People love it. The Standards and Ethics Committee landed on what those core competencies are, and I was privileged to write that course, and there's just a lot of material there ready to shape into a manuscript. So we're in a very early stage in conversation about that.
Okay, and last one, if people are interested in process consulting, where should they look?
Societyforprocessconsulting.com. I had to think that one through. Societyforprocessconsulting.com. And they can learn about it. There's a place there to sign up for courses if they're interested.
Fantastic. Thank you again.
You.
Onward and upward.
All right.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Corporate Caffeine podcast, please help us help you by subscribing. I also hope you'll find us on social media. You can follow me, Dacia Coffee, and my company, The Marketing Blender, by searching us on your favorite platform or checking out the show notes for the links. We bring this to you because we envision a business world full of meaning, connection, and prosperity for us all. Until next time, onward and upward.